As we enter into service this morning, let us not forget the meaning of freedom. Freedom is more than the absence of captivity, much more. Freedom is having the ability to make a better life for yourself and your family. Freedom is having the ability to exercise your natural rights without fear of reprisal. Freedom is the absence of fear itself. Let us seek the truth in freedom. Mary will light the chalice. At times, our own light goes out and is rekindled by a spark from another person. Each of us has cause to think with deep gratitude of those who have lit the flame within us and the community. Before we sing the first hymn, let me remind you to leave yourselves muted. However, we want you and whoever is with you to sing with Jan as big and loud as you like. Make it a joyous experience. So let's all sing the opening hymn, There's More Love Somewhere, number 95. Good morning, and welcome to the Unitarian Universalist community of Cambria. We are glad you have joined us today. As a Unitarian Universalist community, we celebrate religious diversity and welcome all who journey in search of faith and spirituality. The UUCC is a lay-led congregation inviting speakers from different religious traditions and spiritual or scientific backgrounds to speak at our pulpit. We encourage presentations covering a variety of topics and areas of interest to our community that connect with the UU's 7 principles. Today's service centers around the first principle. We affirm and promote the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Reverence and respect for human nature is at the core of the Unitarian Universalist faith. We believe that all the dimensions of our being carry the potential to do good. We celebrate the gifts of being human, our intelligence and capacity for observation and reason, our senses and ability to appreciate beauty, our creativity, our feelings, and emotions. We cherish our bodies as well as our souls. We can use our gifts to offer love, to work for justice, to heal injury, to create pleasure for ourselves and others. My name is Randy Schwalbe, and I am your worship associate this morning. I would like to extend a special welcome to today's guests and visitors. We're glad you have joined us this morning under these challenging circumstances. If you are a guest and would like to introduce yourself, please raise your gold hand and unmute yourself when Susan calls your name. Okay.
I do not see anyone flagging me down, so back to you, Randy.
Okay, we're all family today. All right, if you are not on our mailing list, please visit our website at www.uuccambria.org so that we can keep you informed about all of our activities. And please check out What's Happening, a weekly e-blast sent to all of our members and friends. This is a great way to keep up with the latest news in our community. And a reminder, if you wish to see this or any of our past Zoom services again, recordings of these services can be found on the UUCC website and Facebook as well. The membership committee invites non-members to consider becoming a member of our community. Please contact Janet Cooper or a board member if you are interested. Thank you. Finally, our guest speaker today has agreed to stay after the service for questions and comments. So again, good morning and welcome to everyone. Let us now recite the affirmation. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its prayer. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in freedom, and to help one another. We set aside this time for any short announcements that would be of interest to our UU community members and friends. Please keep your items short and to the point. For any items that need more explanation, please call or email the person after the service to be respectful of everyone's time. If you have an announcement, please raise your gold hand by clicking on the raise hand button in the reactions icon. When Susan calls your name, please unmute yourself, then speak.
Does anyone in the sanctuary have an announcement?
Yes, Susan. This is Andy. I do.
Go right ahead.
Okay. Hi, folks. It's Andy Fagan. You can't see me because I'm back in the brand new control booth of our sanctuary Zoom world, but I hope you can hear me. Just with a happy announcement that we have come to a great conclusion of our Guest at Your Table collection, totaling $525, which, as far as I know, is a new record. And I want to thank you all. I know the Service Committee and Guest at Your Table program thank us all as well. And I'll be putting those checks in the mail tomorrow morning. So once again, thanks to everybody for your contributions.
Right.
Wow, that's great news. Treva, please unmute yourself and make your announcement.
So good morning, all. Just very quickly, last week I made the announcement that we weren't going to quite meet our budget. We were off by about $3,000, and we had an anonymous benevolent donor step forward and actually donate what we needed to meet our budget. So thank you to that benevolent donor, and we are good to roll for 2021.
Thank you, Treva. Robert or Nancy, would you please unmute yourself and make your announcement?
Okay, hi, it's Nancy. That one's Robert. Just letting you know that the Moving Towards Racial Justice discussion group is going to be meeting this Wednesday at 7 o'clock to discuss reparations. Tempted to talk about the difference between the reaction to the events on Wednesday to Black Lives Matter protests, but I think we're going to stick with reparations. There should be an announcement in the newsletter. And if you have any questions, just call or email me, Nancy Tolan. It's tolan@charter.net. Everybody's welcome.
Thank you, Nancy. Dolores, would you please unmute yourself and make your announcement?
Mine's just the weekly announcement to thank you all for bringing all your stuff out of your house and into the church, because it's getting really full with all the Goodwill donations, and we totally appreciate it. And please keep clearing out your stuff, and encourage your neighbors to do the same. So every Saturday from 11 to 1, you can bring all your goodies. And remember that it's practically filling, if we fill up the sanctuary right now, that's our storage facility, we'll make $400 per the truck. So we're trying to fill that up twice. So please keep cleaning it out, get rid of all that extra stuff hanging around. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you, Dolores. Mary Ann, would you please unmute yourself and make your announcement?
Hi, all. Just a reminder that Poetry Spoken Word is going to resume Thursday, the 21st, 7 o'clock. If you have any questions, email me or call me. I'm on the list. And get ready for some fun. We have a couple surprises for that one. Thursday, the 21st, 7 o'clock on Zoom, Poetry Spoken Word.
Thank you, Mary Ann. And I'd like to make just a brief little announcement. In my soliciting pledges, I have done email exchanges with a couple of people we haven't seen in a while, Barbara Tahan and also Tom McGurran. And just a reminder that if you have the time or a chance, they both seem to be facing some health challenges. So you might want to contact them, send them a card, just stay in touch with them so they don't feel excluded from the congregation. And that looks like all of the announcements. So it's yours, Randy.
Okay. All right. Next week, Janet Cooper and Dolores Miera will present Beloved Conversations, The Courage to Be Wrong. Sharing together some of our personal and significant joys and concerns brings us closer as a faith community. We invite you to share the milestones that are deeply felt as part of your personal life. But please be mindful and considerate of all who come to worship with us this morning. This is a time of community building. Okay, the collective flames of these candles also embody all the joys and sorrows which may have gone unspoken today, but are also deeply felt in this community. Alvaro.
Capitalism Has Failed, What Next? By John Bellamy Foster, professor of sociology at the University of Oregon and editor of Monthly Review magazine. Less than 2 decades into the 21st century, it is evident that capitalism has failed as a social system. The world is mired in economic stagnation, financialization, and the most extreme inequality in human history, accompanied by mass unemployment and underemployment, precariousness, poverty, hunger, wasted output and lives, and what at this point can only be called a planetary ecological death spiral. The digital revolution, the greatest technological advance of our time, has rapidly mutated from a promise of free communication and liberated production into new means of surveillance, control, and displacement of the working population. The institutions of liberal democracy are at the point of collapse, while fascism, the rear guard of the capitalist system, is again on the march, along with patriarchy, racism, imperialism, and war. To say that capitalism is a failed system is not, of course, to suggest that its breakdown and disintegration is imminent. It does, however, mean that it has passed from being a historically necessary and creative system at its inception to being a historically unnecessary and destructive one in the present century. Today, more than ever, the world is faced with the epochal choice between the revolutionary reconstitution of society at large and the common ruin of the contending classes. Once sustainable human development, rooted not in exchange values, but in use values and genuine human needs, comes to define historical advance, the future, which now seems closed, will open up in a myriad ways, allowing for entirely new, more qualitative and collective forms of development. This can be seen in the kinds of neat practical measures that could be taken up, but which are completely excluded under the present mode of production. It is not physical impossibility or lack of economic surplus, most of which is currently squandered, that stands in the way of the democratic control of investment or the satisfaction of basic needs: clean air and water, food, clothing, housing, education, healthcare, transportation, and useful work for all. It is not the shortage of technological know-how or of material means that prevents the necessary ecological conversion to more sustainable forms of energy. It is not some inherent division of humanity that obstructs the construction of the new international of workers and peoples directed against capitalism, imperialism, and war. All of this is within our reach, but requires pursuing a logic that runs counter to that of capitalism. The answers to the crisis before us are both social and ecological. They require the rational regulation of the metabolism between human beings and nature under the control of associated humanity, regenerating and maintaining the flows, cycles, and other vital processes of healthy, local, regional, and global ecosystems and species habitats, in accord with the need of the entire chain of human generations. The mainsprings of human action throughout history lie in the drive for human freedom and the struggle to master our relation to the world. The first of these ultimately demands equality and community. The second, human development and sustainability. It is on these struggles for collective advancement that we must ultimately rely if humanity is to have a future at all.
Let us join in a time of meditation, of prayer, and of silence. Let us seek the quiet and the calm, laying aside our struggles. And in the silence, may there be a reverence in our hearts, a thankfulness within our spirit, and a deepened understanding of the meaning of our lives. Let us enter into the stillness. Okay, please come back now. Alvaro? Oh, we're muted. Okay.
Okay.
Alv-
California's migrant workers, a case system enforced by state power, by Bruce Newberger, a retired teacher who worked in the fields of California for a decade in the 1970s. He is the author of Lettuce Wars, 10 Years of Work and Struggle in the Fields of California. California is by far the most important source of fruits, vegetables, nuts, dairy meat, and other products of the US food system. The list of US grown foods produced almost exclusively in California by the state's roughly 800,000 farm workers is a long one, including 2/3 of the country's fruits and nuts and 1/3 of its vegetables. California growers employ 1 out of 3 of the nation's farm workers. Some 70% of these workers were born in Mexico. Estimates are that at least 50% are undocumented, with little chance of changing that. They plant, cultivate, irrigate, harvest, pack, and hold a bountiful 47 billion worth of farm products each year, 17% of the total value of farm products nationally, according to 2013 statistics. Their average annual income is $14,000, and 10% of farm workers live in informal dwellings like garages, sheds, and abandoned vehicles. Despite many hazardous job conditions, only 1 out of 3 farm workers has any kind of health insurance. No one comes out here. No one knows what we go through. Roberto Valdez, a farm worker in the Coachella Valley town of Thermal, California, tells Gabriel Thompson, the interviewer and editor of Chasing the Harvest, a recently published book of interviews with farm workers, growers, union activists, teachers, and others. And as one reads through the compelling stories that are told here, one gets a deep sense of what Roberto means, as well as a passionate urge to have others know of the life and work of those who labor in California's fields. In the era of Trump and his anti-immigrant fascist mongering, California stands out as a kind of fortress of tolerance. After all, it is a sanctuary state. This was not always the case. California was at one time arguably the most overtly racist state in the United States outside of the former slave states. Ground zero for the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, Operation Wetback in 1954, and Proposition 187 in the mid-1990s. Something changed, partly demographically, partly due to persistent struggle, and partly because of the country's dependence on the very people Trump and his kind like to bash. But if we should become too taken by the signs of progress in California toward embracing diversity and opposing overt white supremacy, Chasing the Harvest will help bring us, literally, back down to earth. It is not a sweeping analysis of exploitation, nor does it seek to unearth the mainsprings of that exploitation. But it does give a compelling and powerful picture of what exploitation and oppression, indeed, what an apartheid labor system looks like up close. It brings us face to face with the fact that this is a society that cannot sustain itself, cannot feed itself, without a labor system that ensnares hundreds of thousands in a web of extremely oppressive social relations. A system that is, in all but in name, a caste system enforced by state power.
Okay. Thank you. Today's sermon is titled Addressing the Underlying Causes of Immigration from Mexico to the United States, to be delivered by Alvaro de Regil and connects with 4 of our principles. Principle number 1, the inherent worth and dignity of every person. Principle number 2, a free and responsible search for truth and meaning. Principle number 3, justice, equity, and the compassion in human relations. Principle number 4, the goal of world community with peace, liberty, and justice for all. Alvaro de Regil is the executive director of the Just Semper Global Alliance since 2003, a coalition that supports living wages worldwide as a core element of sustainability, democracy, and business accountability. His work is centered on developing the living wage concept anchored on equal pay for equal work of equal value, and at a broader level, advancing a people and planet paradigm. As part of this transformative concept, he is also increasingly active in the areas of labor rights, business and human rights, no growth, degrowth, steady state economics, and basic income and consumer rights. Alvaro is also a founding member of the International Living Wage Observatory in La Salle University in Mexico City, a contributor to the transformative vision and praxis of the Global Transition Initiative of the Tallis Institute in Boston, Massachusetts, and a research consultant on the underlying causes of immigration with California Lutheran University and with Buen Vecino in Ventura County. Alvaro, to you.
Thank you, Randy. So I am going to share Just let me know if I'm sharing now.
Not yet. We're still seeing Triva's slides.
Okay. Hold on.
Okay, now
You
we
see it
see.
now?
Yes, we do. We have your slides now.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm sorry for the delay. Well, first of all, I really want to thank Randy Schwalbe and the entire community of the Unitarian Universalists of Canberra for your interest in learning about our perspective on the root causes of immigration, an event that has always been a feature in the history of this country, and even more so in the case of California, since colonial times, when a group of Spanish priests and Mexican families came here to establish a chain of missions that gradually became the basis for the populating of California. So I want to insist that I really appreciate this opportunity, because in the next 30 minutes, we're going to be addressing a topic that is barely addressed by the media, by government and society, simply because those who are in power and could benefit from the current structures are not interested in making the general population aware about why immigrants come here. So because of this, at the question of why people come here, most make a very simplistic assumption that immigrants come here because we are rich and they are poor. But the fact is that the reasons why immigrants come here are very complex, and we must become aware that we share a great degree of responsibility on these reasons. So the point that I want to make is that if we really want to address the issue of immigration and solve it, we must stop looking only at the consequences, only at the symptoms, and start addressing the root causes of immigration. In this presentation, we're going to be focusing on Mexico because it has been the main source of immigration to the United States and California for many, many decades, due to our geographic proximity, but even more so after NAFTA came into effect in 1994. So what are the underlying causes of immigration? Well, these are systemic and global economic structures that cause millions of people to lose any opportunity to enjoy a dignified quality of life in their own country as the direct result of the tacit agreement between the elites of both countries, yes, both countries, not just the United States, but also Mexico, to impose and maintain the neoliberal economic structures that benefit them, the 1%, or I rather say the less than 1%, and decimate the livelihoods of the vast majority of the 99%. So what are the specific economic structures that trigger immigration? Well, these are primarily two. The first one is wages that can only be construed as a system of modern slave work wages, and predatory trade agreements such as NAFTA, impacting specific economic sectors with consequences that plunder the standard of living of millions of people. Wages have indeed been decimated deliberately for the last 36 years in Mexico as a result of a consistent and deliberate economic policy to impose neoliberal structures worldwide. These are structures that replace put money in the workers' pockets or demand-side economics with put money in the employers' pockets or supply-side economics. These are policies that specifically reduce and limit labor rights through structural reforms, reduce real wages to increase competitive advantages, privatize public assets and natural resources vital for life, and deregulate economic financial structures to allow markets to set the public agenda and allow them to regulate themselves through non-binding self-designed guidelines and standards. So in this ethos, wages are decimated to attract as much foreign direct investment as possible by offering labor costs at bondage prices, and predatory trade agreements such as NAFTA are created to develop a regional system for global corporations to create what is known as the global commodity supply chains, which are located primarily in the global south and obviously in Mexico, with huge increases in productivity made possible by dramatically reducing labor costs in a good portion of their global manufacturing supply chains. To duly address the root causes of immigration, we must do it in the context of the living wage ethos, which we must all be aware that it is a human right, where, and this is extremely an important concept, equal pay for equal work of equal value is the pillar sustaining it. So because of this, the International Labor Organization has established for decades that for a fair globalization, the decent work concept has led to an international consensus that productive employment and decent work are key elements to achieving poverty reduction. Accordingly, rather than driving people into the informal economy, such as in the case of Mexico, where 60% of the population works in the informal economy, or creating massive migrations, which is also the case for Mexico, global expansion must find ways to deliver opportunities for decent work where people live. So the living wage, anchored on the pillar of equal pay for equal work of equal value, has been enshrined for many decades as a human right in international law. And so we have it. There is nothing new with this. We have it in Article 23 of the UN's Universal Declaration of Human Rights of 1948, concerning the right of workers to equal pay of equal work. We also have it in Article 7 of the UN's International Covenant of Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights of 1966 for fair wages and equal remuneration for work of equal value. And of course, we have it in the ILO's Convention 100 of equal pay for equal value. Now, to explain the flows of migration from Mexico to the United States, we're going to be looking at the two economic sectors that are greatly impacted by NAFTA and which constitute the main source of Mexican immigration to the United States. These are the manufacturing and agricultural sector. And we're going to first be looking at the manufacturing sector in an ethos of asymmetric wage rates in North America in the context of equal pay for equal work of equal value for all employee manufacturing using purchasing power parities, which is used to account for the differences in the cost of living between two different countries. But in order to do that, I am going to ask you to do with me the following exercise. Let's ask ourselves the following question. Why, if a worker working for Ford Motor Company in Dearborn, Michigan, putting 4 parts in the Ford Focus assembly line, what if he's making $40 an hour? A worker working also for Ford Motor Company in the exact same Ford Focus assembly line, putting exactly the same 4 parts, but this time in Mexico, he makes only $4 an hour, or about 10%. But the cost of living in Mexico is not 10% of the cost of living in the United States. It's a lot more. So let's do this by looking at real figures. So in 2016, the nominal hourly wage rate in manufacturing in the United States was $39.03, whereas in Mexico, for doing the same job, equal pay for equal work of equal value was $3.91. But the cost, so about 10%, but the cost of living was not 10%, it was actually 54%. So that means that that worker should have been paid $21.15. But since he was only paid $3.91, he received only 18% of what he should have received in the first place for doing the same job. I'm going to ask you to bear in mind that 18%, because now we're going to look at how wages have been deliberately decimated in Mexico over time. So if we go back to 1975, we see that that 18% was actually 37%, and then it went up to 42%, and then it started going down to 33, 28, And by the time NAFTA came into effect in 1994, as you can see, and ever since that time, it has become a flat line as the direct result of the deliberate economic policy to plunder wages in Mexico. And we're going to look at the effects of NAFTA 1.0, in the inbound plant sector, or also known as maquiladora sector, which is the sector of many plants across the US-Mexico border on the Mexican side of the global commodity chains in place in Mexico. So the main features are that in 1976, before NAFTA, the sector had 448 plants employing 74,500 workers. So at that time, this sector was really marginal to the Mexican economy. But more than 20 years later, in 2017, after NAFTA, the sector reported 6,166 plants employing almost 3 million workers at, once again, modern slave work prices. The level of exploitation, labor and human rights violations, and workplace hazards and insecurity is the worst in the entire industrial sector, including the murder or disappearance of thousands of female maquiladora workers in Ciudad Juarez and many cities along the border. And once again, the main reason for US companies offshoring into Mexico is cheap labor costs that allow employers to maximize the return on investment and shareholder value. Now we're going to move from the global perspective to the domestic perspective. We're going to look at the value of wages in Mexico versus the minimum necessary to enjoy a dignified quality of life. And in order to do that, what we do is that we compare the cost of what is called the indispensable basket of goods, which is an academic indicator that determines the minimum necessary for a household of 4 to enjoy a dignified quality of life. We're going to compare that against the Mexican monthly general minimum wage. So in 2014, the cost of that basket was $16,445, but the minimum wage of 2019 could only afford 12%. Well, by 2019, nothing has changed. I mean, the cost of the basket has gone up as well as the minimum wage, but the affordability has remained the same. Of course, as in any economy, many millions of Mexicans make much more than a minimum wage. They could be making 2, 3, 4, 5 or more minimum wages. So we're going to look at the distribution of wage earners in Mexico by the number of minimum wages in 2019. And according to official data from the Mexican government, 78% of all employed persons earn not more than 5 minimum wages in 2019. But it takes 7 minimum wages to afford the indispensable basket of goods. In other words, it takes 7 minimum wages to be earning really a living wage. So our estimate with a great degree of confidence is that not more than 15% of all wage earners in Mexico really earn a living wage in 2019. Now we're going to do the same going to the manufacturing sector, which is the sector that has the best paid workers in the economy. And we're going to do the same comparison against the indispensable basket of goods. So in US dollars, the estimated monthly cost of the indispensable basket of goods was $1,316. But the monthly net income after taxes of manufacturing workers was $787. So not even the best paid workers in the economy were able to afford the indispensable basket of goods. They could only afford 60% of that. Now we're going to move to the other sector, the agricultural sector. And so what is the direct effect of NAFTA on the loss of millions of jobs in agriculture? Well, NAFTA's rather pernicious effects destroyed or reduced the quality of life of millions of people in the 3 countries, particularly in the agricultural sector due to agribusiness. But it was in Mexico where the greatest damage was inflicted. Let's look first at what happened in the United States. Just between 1996 and 2001, farming subsidies nearly tripled to more than 20 billion. However, net income of farmers dropped 16.5%, forcing about 300,000 farmers, mostly small farmers, out of business. As a consequence, many rural communities died as storefronts were boarded up, churches were closed down, people were forced from their homes by the toxic fumes of industrial animal factories, and an amphetamine epidemic swept the United States. In the case of Mexico, NAFTA liberalized corn and many other products such as sugar and beans. But agribusiness corporations such as Cargill and ADM took advantage of that $20 billion from the federal government and flooded the Mexican market with subsidized products at prices below production cost in Mexico. As a consequence, by 2006, over 2 million agricultural jobs, including 1.7 million small farmers, were lost, and workers, farmers, and their families were forced to leave the countryside. And when I say that 2 million jobs were lost, I really mean that 8 million people lost their livelihoods, because the average number of members per household in Mexico is 4. So if 2 million jobs were lost, it really means that 8 million people lost their livelihoods. As a consequence, millions of Mexicans were forced to leave their towns with 3 choices. The first choice was to move to the slums of Mexico's big cities and seek work, mostly in the underground economy, at once again modern slave work wages. The second choice was to come here, to come to the US, migrate to the US at their own peril. And the third choice, or choice of last recourse, of course, was to join the ranks of people working for the drug cartels or other forms of organized crime. Now, let's look at the potential of the new NAFTA that very recently passed late last year on Mexican wages. And we're going to look at 2 provisions. One is a potentially positive provision, and the other one is a potentially negative provision. The potentially positive provision is that Mexico's labor reform incorporated in 2018 the ILO's Convention 98, which is the right to organize and collective bargaining. So with this convention, there are over 100 conventions in the International Labor Organization, but there are 8 core conventions. And with this convention, Mexico has already ratified, the Mexican Congress has already ratified the 8 core conventions. But this is really ironic, because if we look at the United States, the US has only ratified 2 of the 8 core conventions. So the point is that far more important than ratifying international laws is the enforcement of labor rights. Also, in line with this convention, NAFTA's 2.0 text includes modest but meaningful labor standard gains. And the key one is the rules to end wage suppression protection contracts in Mexico, which has been the standard and which constitutes an agreement between employers and corrupt trade unions that impose modern slave work wages on Mexican workers. So, because this has been suppressed and because Mexico has ratified Convention 98, this could make a real difference over time to raise Mexican wages, which also would cut incentives to outsource jobs from the US to Mexico. However, so far, NAFTA's 2.0 text lacks the monitoring or enforcement terms necessary for the rules to make a difference for workers. If this changes, and the new rules are enforced on both sides of the border, it would be very positive for both sides of the border. Now, there is a potentially rather negative new labor provision if it materializes, and this is a new rules of origin provision for the motor vehicle industry, Article 7. In this provision, parties agreed on a labor value content of 40% for passenger vehicles and 45% for light and heavy trucks. What this means is that 40 to 45% of the value of cars and light and heavy trucks must be produced by workers paid at the very least $16 an hour in order to qualify as originating in North America in order to enjoy zero trade tariffs. Well, the first problem is that it is rather difficult to calculate its real effect because only other firms know precisely where each element of their product is made, and so far there is no process in place to assess this effect. But I have to emphasize that this is a very important provision because about 50% of everything that Mexico exports into the United States comes from the automobile industry. Now, the much bigger problem is the potential of a double-edged sword. This could well be very positive, this provision, by pressuring corporations to increase wages in Mexico. But it can also be a Trojan horse from the Trump administration against Mexico. Let me explain. In 2016, the hourly total compensation costs in the automotive industry were Mexico $4.68, United States $48.97, and Canada $34.19. So as you can see, for the US and Canada, this is a non-issue because their hourly rate is far higher than the $16 threshold. But for Mexico, there's a huge gap between $4.68 and $16, and it's a huge challenge. So the gaps on real cost of living wages in manufacturing, and specifically in the automotive industry, are so enormous that it would take, at the very least, 2 decades to fully close them from $4.68 to what it would be under the concept of equal pay for equal work, $26.54 and above the $16 threshold. However, there is a potential positive scenario. The new Mexican government has committed to recover real wages after 36 years of plundering those wages by the previous administrations, and has already increased the minimum wage by 16.2% in 2019, 20% in 2020, and 15% in 2021. This should put pressure on all wages above the minimum wage. But even if we make a simplistic assumption and apply the actual increase to the minimum wage for 2019 of 16.2%, the motor industry wages, and we project to achieve a nominal wage of just $16 an hour, it would take roughly 8 years to reach the motor vehicle threshold if all assumptions, inflation, cost of living, and exchange rates materialize. So as you can see in this chart, it would take, at the very least, if these assumptions hold, 8 years. The double edge is that if the US government wishes, it could easily demand under NAFTA 2.0 at any time that a chunk of motor vehicle production from Mexico be transferred to the US because the local value content of $16 was not met in Mexico. So if this happens, it would be extremely detrimental to the Mexican economy, and even more so to workers that will lose their jobs and obviously their livelihood. Now, in conclusion, since NAFTA, it can clearly be asserted that the modern slave work ethos in place in Mexico subsidizes the US economy and US population in terms of capital extraction for the benefit of the shareholder value of institutional investors of international financial markets, both in manufacturing and agriculture. Wages and salaries of US workers and employees who are part of their global supply chain, and US consumers, us, paying much lower prices from the products that come from Mexico. Now let's look at the consequences of Mexico's modern slave work ethos in immigration flows. So between 2000 and 2005, more than 400,000 Mexicans, mostly from rural communities, moved annually to the US. So by 2009, more than 12 million had moved to the US, but undocumented immigration stabilized by 2014 at around 11 million as a result of the increased criminalization of immigration and the emergence of its incarceration industrial complex. As a result, the number of undocumented Mexican immigrants in the US has steadily decreased and stabilized at around 5 million. Yet nearly 200,000 continue to cross the border from Mexico annually, with even more from Central America and many other countries, a situation that I can guarantee you that will continue as long as the root causes of immigration remain unaddressed. Now, who benefits specifically from these systemic structures? Well, first, the institutional investors of international financial markets and their corporations by maximizing their shareholder value. Also, politicians both in the US and Mexico by getting financial support for their electoral campaigns in exchange for imposing the market-driven agenda designed by the business elites. Also, the savings in state wages paid in Mexico subsidize the much higher wages paid to equivalent workers in the US of the same corporations. In fact, globally, it is estimated that 25 to 40% of the cost of labor in the North, in the US, is subsidized by the South's meager wages. Lastly, US consumers greatly benefit from bondage wages paid in Mexico by enjoying much lower prices than if the entire production would be made in the US. So we must become aware that we're also benefiting from the current structures as consumers. In conclusion, Mexico subsidizes the US economic growth in terms of shareholder value, workers' wages, and consumer prices. Now, how can we address the root causes of immigration? Well, the first thing is that we must become aware about the main hurdles. And the first one is that the same systemic structures that benefit from this arrangement and are not interested in us becoming aware about these causes oppose any type of binding regulatory framework via national and or international law to force global corporations to start paying a living wage to older workers in their global operations. This is also why the voluntary concept of corporate social responsibility for corporations is really a public relations hoax, because companies have systematically refused to incorporate a living wage standard in their voluntary guidelines. And in my profession, I have experienced that many, many times. They completely refuse to incorporate into their voluntary standards the payment of a living wage to their workers in the South, in Mexico, and in other operations outside of the US. And the other hurdle is that we can write to our members of Congress, but it has a relative effect because the same systemic structures that benefit from this arrangement finance the political campaigns of many of them. So we are left with two tools. One is increasing our pressure using our consumer power, which is a very powerful tool if it is well organized, and two, increasing our pressure with our members of Congress. Lastly, what can we do as responsible citizens in practical terms to effectively address the root causes of immigration? Well, the first thing and the easiest one to do is to use our consumer power to make well-informed and socially and environmentally conscious decisions to support responsible companies. There are some responsible companies, and reject irresponsible ones. We should also join consumer organizations and push them to include in their own agenda a project to push for a living wage standard in the guidelines used by corporations voluntarily. And of course, we should also write to our members of Congress and ask them to push for binding legislation that would force corporations to pay living wages globally. So as you can see, the key factor in explaining the underlying causes of immigration, of why immigrants come here, is obviously the living wage. And in the case of Mexico, I can guarantee you 100% that if global corporations, if we force global corporations to start paying Mexicans a living wage in their country, Mexican workers would be more than happy, extremely happy, to remain in their own country to enjoy a dignified quality of life. Thank you so much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have at the end of the service. Thank you again to everyone.
Thank you, Alvaro, for a very informative and inspiring talk. Okay.
Thank you.
Let's see. So normally at this time, we receive offerings from our congregants. However, due to the virtual format of this service, we invite you to make your offering in one of the methods shown on the slideshow. These methods are posted in the newsletter and on the UUCC website. And please keep in mind, our congregation is entirely self-governed by the democratic process. One of the privileges of our free church tradition is to provide all of the financial support for our many ministries from among ourselves. Generosity, therefore, is one of the spiritual values we recognize as central to our personal and our institutional well-being. You're invited to participate in the blessing of giving by sending us an offering. Thank you. Thank you, Jan. Our thanks for all the gifts given and received for the work in this community. Let us now sing the doxology.
From all that dwell below the skies, let faith and hope with love arise. Let beauty, truth, and good be sung through every land, by every tongue.
Okay. Please join in the singing the closing hymn, A Place at the Table by Lori True and Shirley Evans.
For everyone born a place at the table, for everyone born clean water and bread, a shelter, a space, a safe place for growing, for everyone born a star overhead, for young and for old a place at the table, a voice to be heard, a part in the song, the hands of a child in hands that are wrinkled, for everyone, and young and old, a neat new way to live, and we will delight when we are creators of justice and joy. Yes, we will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy. For just and unjust a place at the table, abuser abused with need to forgive, in anger, in hurt, a mindset of mercy, for just and unjust, a new way to live, for everyone born a place at the table, to live without fear and simply to be, to work, to speak out, to witness and worship, for everyone born the right to be free, and we will delight when we are creators of justice and joy. Yes, we will delight when we are creators of justice, justice and joy.
Thank you, Mary. Let us now recite the valediction. We extinguish the flame of this chalice, and we know that the light of truth and love and the warmth of this community go with us until we meet again. After the benediction, please click on the gallery view button in the upper right corner of your screen. Alvaro.
My closing words encourage us to reflect on the fact that Mexican immigrants are forced to leave their hometowns because of systemic structures imposed by both US and Mexican governments. They all bear an enormous responsibility for the plight of immigrants. But we also bear a very meaningful responsibility for allowing our governments and corporations to benefit from these systemic structures of their own design. If we want to solve undocumented immigration, we must address these causes. Nobody wants to leave their hometowns and families under conditions of great perilousness and precariousness. Mexicans, as all people in the world, love their own country, and they would be more than happy to stay there if they find the conditions to enjoy a dignified quality of life for them and their families. So our first step as citizens is to put pressure on our representatives to change the underlying structures triggering immigration. I beg you to realize this is the only way that we can address immigration humanely and sustainably. Thank you.